So you just heard about the phrase human design. What does it mean? Where does it come from? What's it about? What's its value? What's its purpose? When you hear human design, you don't really know how to conceptualize what it means, what it's referring to. So my goal here was, when I first heard the phrase human design, I floundered, truly, I floundered. I super struggled in order to find the resources that were going to put me on the most efficient pathway to being able to understand why I might want to care about the system, why I might be interested, what it could do for me. Ultimately, most of us are going to land at this information and our questions are going to be, what is this for? How is it a benefit to me? What can this do for me? And now that I'm so many years into my experiment and I have gone very, very deep into the information, my goal is to bring a lot of that depth up to a surface level understanding. I'd like to think that what I'm about to share with you is cosmic information that has an incredibly practical and personal application. And it's very, very important for me to use source-based language, in particular keynotes. So right off the bat, I've given you some words where you're like, I don't know how to understand these in relation to a lot of the other words that I know. So source-based, we're going to talk about the origin of the system and what is considered source material. On the first layer, Ra-Uru-Hu is the person who brought us the human design system. But he didn't create the human design system. So there becomes another question of what is his source of the information? How did he get it? And it's a very, very interesting story. When Ra talks about the experience of this, ultimately he has labeled it his encounter with the voice. Now, what he spoke to him did not call itself the voice. He heard it very acoustically. He also had visuals. He had many, many sensations and ways in which the information was relayed to him. Now, what spoke to him is non-human. Now, you're here likely because you heard the phrase human design, but that's not what Ra was given. What Ra was given was called the design of forms. Form is a very important word because it's got a lot of times that it's going to come up, and the different ways I'm going to talk about it are going to help you integrate. That means process, hear and process through your body. I want you to be able not only hear what I'm saying, but be able to take that information into your body at a cellular level. There are layers to which you will process what I'm talking about. When we're exposed to information, we see the information, we read the information, we hear the information, we know the information. And I'm talking about you and I encountering any type of information. But there's a difference between becoming aware of something, seeing something, and actually understanding something. Understanding something takes a lot more time. And that's what we're going to call a cellular integration. Now, when you're able to talk to somebody else about something, that helps deepen a layer of understanding and it helps your cellular integration. So perhaps you've already read something about human design and you had a hard time making sense of what it was trying to explain to you. But through what I'm communicating, maybe you get a deeper level of understanding. You can bring this information into your cells a little bit more. There's a lot of things that I'm going to share that are very like touch points on what happened. Let's call them breadcrumbs for curiosity. I'm going to say a lot of things, but not necessarily a lot of explanation behind them. If you have a lot of questions about what I'm saying, that's awesome. Questions are going to lead you to look for more information that provides more context to what I'm saying. In a very light synapsis, Ra's encounter with the voice, it happened on the island of Ibiza. It lasted for 8 days. He was only able to withstand the experience that he went through. 1, because he was a manifestor. 2, because his dog was with him in the process. The dog's name is Barley. And because he is a pure individual in terms of his design, his circuitry. Ra's encounter with the voice happened in January of 1987. There are some very, very significant historical dates that I will acknowledge consistently throughout my videos. The transmission for human design came January 1987. Now, there's information that I'm going to bring up that comes from cosmology. In terms of the overarching human design system, I want you to think about, we all have an understanding of what it is to go to school, but within school, there are different subjects available for study. Ra was given a design of forms, and a grander name for this actually is the science of differentiation. But humans are arrogant, self-involved creatures. So we have taken an aspect of this system called human design. You could call it a subject of the system, human design. And it has tended to be the title that we most often refer to. So even here, when you're hearing human design, what you're really looking into is a grander subject called the design of forms or the science of differentiation. Now I bring up cosmology because cosmology is one of the subjects, and in cosmology, to greatly reduce this, it is the science of where we come from. You may think that this is a universe that we live in, but the more that you engage with Ra's material, the more you're going to hear the term biverse. When we talk about crystals in this system, there are 2 very important ways that we talk about them, or types of crystals that we're talking about. Design crystals and personality crystals. Now, if you have looked at a human design body graph, if you have already found your body graph, one of the first things that you're going to see is this kind of human-ish shape in the middle with a couple bigger shapes and a bunch of lines going around it and a bunch of smaller numbers. That's the core of the body graph. But down the sides, in red and black, you're going to see sequential numbers with little symbols beside them. Now, I'm not going to get into how to read the body graph. What I want to talk about right now is where does each crystal belong? When you look at the body graph, typically and classically, when this is done correctly, the red side is going to be the form or design side. The black side is going to be the personality side. And there's a reason that they are separate from each other. The red side, the design or form side, is going to be about your body. Ultimately, this is about form principle. My body is my form. When Ra was given a design of forms, ultimately what he was given was very deep knowledge about how we are, what we are, how we exist, how we came to be, how we function, how we are programmed, how we operate. It eventually becomes easier to understand very practical information. But the design side has a design crystal. The personality side also has a crystal, the personality crystal. So we have 2 very basic rudimentary concepts that we're working with right now, and 2 different crystals associated with them. When Ra told us that he had an encounter with the voice, it's in the deeper aspects of cosmology that he tells you what that voice is and where it came from. And it came from the design crystal bundle in the core of the Earth. So there's this giant design crystal bundle in the core of the Earth. And what I want you to think about is things that are very form-based. Tapping that table in front of me. Very, very material. right? I want you to think about structure. Now I'm already laughing, right? Because in your Welcome to Human Design, it is like, what is she talking about? And that was honestly, that was Ra's biggest fear after he had the encounter with the voice. When it was over for him, he wept. Partially because the experience was over. It was never going to happen again. And he had a choice to make, maybe, maybe not, about whether or not he was going to share this information with people. Ra is a manifestor. That's one of the 4 auric types. And manifestors are here to have impact. The information that he has brought to us has certainly impacted many of us and mutated us in a way that we will never be the same again. If you're here with me talking about this, there's a good chance that you're never going to be the same again either. Now, there's a word that we're going to use called juxtaposition. And again, in a very reductionist way, what I want you to think about with juxtaposition is 2 things that really contrast each other side by side. There is a tension, okay? A juxtaposition are these 2 almost like forces pulling at each other. Now, when we have a design of forms, so we talked about your design crystal is the red side of the body graph. The design crystal that made the form that is your body, the design crystal that made the form that is my body, came from the bundle in the core of the earth. My design crystal came from the bundle that ultimately is what gave Ra his encounter. His encounter with the voice, as he terms it, is referencing something that was given to him. It came from the design crystal bundle in the core of the earth. There is a tiny piece of that crystal bundle that created what my body is. If you've ever heard something along the lines of the micro is the macro is the micro is the macro, that will help you understand what I'm about to say a little bit more easily. When a person is made, okay, that's when conception happens. You know, forgive the language I'm about to use here, but when the man ejaculates sperm, that sperm has to penetrate an egg in order for conception to happen. Now, if you think about the primary sperm that is able to penetrate the egg, that creates the initiation of building that baby, that fetus in utero, there's a sequence that is happening there. The information required for that sequence comes with the design crystal. There is a crystal that goes with the primary sperm that is going to penetrate and create the building of the form that is you or I. There are a lot of patterns in design. There's a lot of math, there's a lot of science, there are a lot of very cool equations to be expressed here. Now, one of the things that you will hear about, if you haven't already, is that the difference between the red side and the black side in terms of what programmed what for timing is called 88 degrees of separation, which is loosely translated into roughly 88 days. So there is a difference in the numbers that you're seeing that is represented by a change of roughly 88 calendar days. And so where the other end of this equation comes out is the baby is being built in mom. Now, when that baby comes out of mom, when that baby is exposed to the neutrino stream separate from mom, it has a personality crystal that is programmed by the neutrino stream that is happening in that exact moment. All right, things are getting really interesting. We've got design crystals, we've got personality crystals, and now we're talking about a neutrino stream. I'll be honest, the neutrino is really what hooked me when I started learning about human design. What is a neutrino? Where do they come from? Neutrinos are subatomic particles. We get the majority of the ones that we experience from our sun in our solar system. It is the largest creator of neutrinos, and as they leave the sun, now the sun is a star. In theory, other stars are also creating neutrinos, but the closest star to us is our sun. So we are going to experience significantly more programming from the neutrino stream that comes from our sun. Now, neutrinos, there's some pretty cool information about them. What do I like the best? Okay, neutrinos travel slightly slower than the speed of light. If something cannot travel as fast as light, it must be heavier than light. Neutrinos carry a tiny amount of mass. And the way that we translate this is that they carry a tiny amount of information. Now, neutrinos are able to pass through anything. Planets, people, walls, anything that you can think of, neutrinos will consistently move through them. But as they move through things, they pick up and release little bits of information. We'll call it imprinting. Now that causes them to move slightly slower than the speed of light, but that is still incredibly fast. And you are being hit with trillions of them constantly. They never stop pouring through you. So let's kind of personify these a little bit, and we call them cosmic messengers. Now those crystals that I talked about, they are consistently filtering the neutrino stream. Let's talk about the personality crystal for a second. This is going to be a really weird conversation. Welcome to a very weird system, and yet it's got answers for pretty much any question you're going to have. I'm not going to give you the answers. I don't even know what your questions are, but I'm pretty sure you're going to have a lot of them after this video. Okay, let's talk about your personality crystal. Where does it come from? It comes from the atmosphere. Now, while the design crystal is coming from the core of the Earth, the personality crystal is coming from the atmosphere, and it comes from bundles in the atmosphere. Okay, so let's just zoom out for a second. Let's talk about below and above. That's it. That's all I really want you to think of. Or maybe you'll perceive it as, you know, dark and light, because you might be thinking about underground and up in the sky. I want you to just kind of juxtapose these concepts together. Personality crystals, design crystals. Now, if they're both with you because you exist, what's making them stay together? Why doesn't the design crystal want to go back down to the earth? And why doesn't the personality crystal want to go back up into the atmosphere? They do. So why don't they? A lot of us find this information easier to relate through comparing it to other concepts that we already understand very well. We understand the concepts of relationships, and we live in a time where marriage is a thing. So let's use that to understand what's happening here. The design crystal and the personality crystal are in a type of cosmic marriage together. Now they're being held together by a singular force called your magnetic monopole. The magnetic monopole has basically put a leash on these two crystals and is holding them together in a cosmic union, ultimately a cosmic arranged marriage that these two didn't necessarily want to be a part of. In fact, they can't wait to separate from each other, but that's not going to happen until you die. When you die, design crystal is done, and the personality crystal possibly gets to go back up into the atmosphere. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of information that hopefully drives some curiosity, leads you to go look into things. I want you to think about or look up something called the Bardo experience, because there's no guarantee that your personality crystal is going back up into the atmosphere when it's done in this incarnation, being this quantum illusion that is you. That magnetic monopole is holding these two forces together, and when you die, it's going to release them. Okay, I've given you quite a bit of backstory, quite a bit to chew on. Let's make it more personal. Let's make it more practical. Let's see why you might want to care about this. What benefit is it to you to be able to know and understand this information? We're going to talk about the human design body graph again for a second. So in red was that design. In black is the personality. Now, let's talk about the idea of being conscious or being aware. Now, the body graph is going to show colored lines inside of it. If the line is colored with red from the design side, it's an aspect of the body that you do not have conscious access to. If it's in black, representing the personality and what you get to be aware of, this is something that you have conscious access to. So right off the bat, I want you to think about all of the black things demonstrated in this body graph as things that you're going to have an ability to think about, resonate to, become aware of, be conscious of. The body has a very different type of consciousness. It's not the thinking about it kind of consciousness that you're probably assuming. The body has a very different type of consciousness that needs to be developed, and it's developed through something called cognition. Again, I'm not going to go deeper than this because I have other videos where I plan to get more in depth with the body graph. This is ultimately talking about how these kind of like, what topics, what crystals, what is she talking, what was he talking about? How do I start to translate this into the thing that you're probably looking at is like, this is my body graph and what does it have to do with all of this other stuff she's talking about? Now, if you found your body graph, that means that you already know that you needed your birth information. What is the birth information that's required? We need to know exactly where on the planet you lived because the time zone is relevant. We need to know what year, what month, what day, and what minute you were born so we can calculate a very, very specific chart for you. And what we need to finish the calculation is the moment that you were born, because the moment you were born, what we're calculating is what neutrino information was programming you. And ultimately what that programming is who you consciously think that you are. Your personality is what you're consciously aware of as you. It's who you think you are. Now there's a very important concept that we talk about, and it's called the passenger. There's a really cool visual that Ra uses to describe the design crystal, the magnetic monopole, and the personality crystal, and the relationship that they have to each other, and ultimately what each one is responsible for in this life that you have. Your design or your form is seen as the vehicle, the thing that is taking you through this life. Now the magnetic monopole is the driver. Now what your personality is the passenger in the back seat. Now we live in a time where we have like self-driving cars. A lot of us have a fantasy of like, wouldn't it be nice to just, sit in my own car, do whatever I want to do, and it takes me where I need to go. If that idea appeals to you, then it should be pretty easy for you to understand the point of passenger consciousness. Your passenger is not the one driving, and it's also not the vehicle. It's the thing going for the ride. The life is the ride. You're on a ride, and you get to be aware, you get to watch what's happening. Your passenger ultimately is meant to watch, not interfere. We don't want the passenger grabbing the wheel, because what happens there is it's not actually you doing it. It's what we call the not self. Now let's go a little bit deeper into the body graph for a second, the human body graph. That human looking thing in the middle of it has 9 larger centers that will either be colored in or they will appear to be white. They're not actually white, but the background of what you're looking at is probably white. Let's acknowledge them more like clear so that you start to see them as empty, as in not much going on. Nobody's home. There's not a permanent resident in there. But if you're looking at your body graph and you see that some of these 9 centers are colored in, one of the next conclusions that you're going to draw is that one colored in center has a colored in line that touches another colored in center. So centers are what those 9 shapes are called, but the lines that connect the two are going to be called channels. This is where we start to get into what we call aura mechanics. And the very easiest way to summarize this is depending on what centers are connected in the body graph, that will determine your aura mechanics, as in what are you? So there are 4 aura types. We have a reflector, a projector, a generator or sacral being, and we have a manifestor. What's the difference? You can tell just by looking at the centers in the body graph and which ones are connected, which of these types that you are. Now, the 2 easiest types to identify by the body graph are the sacral being or the reflector. The reflector is the easiest to identify because a reflector doesn't have any of the centers colored in. Every single of the 9 centers will appear clear or white, or there's no consistent definition, which means that there are no channels either. Now, the second most easy type to identify is a sacral being, because there is one center down, it's one up from the bottom, and it's between the 2 triangles. It's a square, and we call this one the sacral center. Some people pronounce it sacral center. If that center is colored in, you are going to be a sacral being. What is a sacral being is either considered a generator or manifesting generator, but as soon as that sacral center is defined, it creates a generator aura. Now, the auras are all described very differently between the types. The sacral being has a warm, open, enveloping aura. It is taking things in from all sides. That reflector that we talked about, where there's no center definition. A reflector is a very, very special kind of aura. It's so special, it's incredibly rare. Only one, it kind of looks like I'm saying 2, only 1% of the population is ever going to be a reflector. Now, looking at the reflector design, you might get the idea that they are very open to things, because we talked about like no definition, no consistency, nobody's home there all the time. There's a sense of openness. The reflector aura in particular has a very cool defense mechanism, and it's what Ra called the Teflon aura. The reflector is much more open to the transits. Now, when we talk about transits, I want you to think about what is going on astrologically for us. And we see that we can kind of anchor that in when we talked about how the personality at birth is programmed by filtering the neutrino stream in that moment. You get an astrological snapshot of what you consciously identify as. Now, the sun is always moving. If you look at all of these symbols down the sides in the body graph, you may or may not recognize that what these symbols represent are different astrological elements, like the sun, the earth, north node, south node. We got Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Like, we got a whole bunch of them going down the side. And those are the ones that are really having a conditioning effect on the reflector. When reflectors have the Teflon aura, they are very resilient to the conditioning of other people, but they're not resilient to the conditioning that is coming from the transit. When I talk about conditioning, it can very loosely be understood by the impact or effect or influence that somebody or something has on us. We are conditioned by food. We are conditioned by people. We are conditioned by so many different things. And ultimately what that is it's like the longer you're under the influence of something, the more you tend to take it on and think that it's yours. Now, we are all sensitive to influence in very different ways according to our aura mechanics. The generator, the sacral being, is very, very open and enveloping, and so they are very sensitive to the influence of other people's definition. Sacral beings are the largest population on the planet. Depending on when you look and what you hear, you're going to hear information that sounds like it's between 65 and 70%. That's most of the planet. Now, most of the planet has that defined sacral center. Now, what that means is what they're really not that susceptible to is the conditioning of other people like them. They don't have the openness there for somebody to come and define it, to condition them with. But the other two types that I haven't gone into yet, the Manifestor and the Projector, they have open or undefined sacral centers. So there is the ability to take that sacral being into them. It's almost like putting a puzzle piece into something. Like, you know, I think about the like little wooden puzzle boards that kids got, and there's like a little handle and a little shape, or maybe they're like matching an animal to it and they got that little cow goes in there and the little sheep goes in there. That's kind of how I like to explain what it is to pick up someone else's definition in like the most basic reductionist kind of way. You have an empty spot and somebody else can stick their shape into that. Now, what happens when you take that shape in is you amplify the effect of it. That means I'm a projector type, okay? I have a undefined sacral center. When a generator type comes near me within my auric space, it's not like they mentally choose to do this to me. These are simply the aura mechanics. They come into my space and I take that definition into where I'm undefined and I amplify what this feels like. So as a projector or as a manifestor without a defined sacral center, we amplify sacral definition. We are incredibly stimulated, which is a really nice way to say we're very quickly exhausted by this type of energy. Non-sacral beings do not have a generative life force. That's the beauty of being a generator, is that you are literally generating life force energy. Now, looking at a body graph and trying to discern the difference between a projector and a manifestor is a little bit tricky until you have more awareness of what each center does. There are 4 out of 9 centers that are considered motors. They're the root, the sacral, the solar plexus, and the ego. But we already talked about what it means to have that sacral defined. As soon as the sacral center is defined, we know this is a generator type. You no longer have to question whether or not this is a manifestor. But that leaves us 3 different motors: the root, the ego, and the solar plexus. If you can take one of those 3 motors and connect it to the throat center, the square right here, not the head, not the ajna, not the triangles at the top, but the square right here. If that can connect to the solar plexus, the root, or the ego directly in a straight line without breaking, without any gaps in between, you got yourself a manifestor. And what does a manifestor aura feel like? Well, it's more noticeable for what it feels like to the other. And what Ra described it as is closed and repelling. Now, a lot of the times people hear words in human design and they don't love the word. But when I'm using the language of human design, I want you to get past that. I don't want you to think about whether or not you have an opinion on the word choice. The words have meaning for a reason. They carry frequency. If you want to know why it's called a closed and repelling aura, that's one of the breadcrumbs that I want you to follow about why it was named that. Now, identifying a projector in a bodygraph is much more about a process of elimination. A projector is going to have defined centers. They are going to have channels because they have defined centers. They're not going to have a defined sacral center because they're not a generator type. And there's no straight line from motor to throat. Otherwise, they'd be a manifestor. There are a lot of projected channels in the bodygraph. Now, one of the cool things about projectors is we are the newest beings to come onto the planet. Projectors are not here until 1781. So I said in the beginning I was going to give you a couple significant historical dates. 1781 is the birth of the projector type. Now, projectors are here for a very specific function. We talked about the magnetic monopole, the thing that holds the design crystal and the personality crystal together in this forced quantum cosmic marriage. Now, that monopole, only one type has the ability to lock on to the monopole and extract information. Now, the purpose of extracting information is the ability to ask questions. We call it guiding. Projectors guide, and that does not mean give advice. It means grab the magnetic monopole. Projectors' auras are very penetrative, okay? So as far as auras go, we had the Teflon aura, we had the open and enveloping aura, we have the closed and repelling aura, and now we have the penetrative aura. I want you to think about what penetration typically implies. And in the world we live in now, a lot of us are up on what consent means. I want you to think about consent, because every single aura type has a strategy, a way that they are meant to engage with other people on the planet. And this is where this information starts to really become personal and practical, because the core of the human design aspects of the science of differentiation is teaching humans how to behave, ultimately, how to engage with the world in a way where we stop encountering so much resistance. I want you to think about what resistance means. Resistance is like walking into the wind. It's so much harder to fight against nature, and it is so much harder to fight against your own true nature. Human design is here for you to have a framework for how to live your life in a way that you don't have to feel like you're consistently fighting against yourself, fighting against other people, fighting against forces bigger than yourself. It comes down to 2 things called strategy and authority. And until we got to the place of explaining a little bit about aura mechanics, you don't understand why we have strategy and how to use it. And you don't understand where to identify authority and what its point is. Strategy is the way that you engage with the world. If you're going to engage, let's talk about with other people. Let's just make it very easy. To engage with other people, we all have a strategy. The reflector's strategy is to wait 28 days. And ultimately, it's kind of cool, the reflector authority takes about 28 days to reach clarity. Now you can really reduce this in a way that says the reflector is here to wait quite a long time to engage and make decisions. Now the reason that we say 28 days is because this is the lunar cycle. We talked about the reflector being involved with the transits, being open to programming from astrological forces. They are following the moon. The projector strategy is wait to be invited. We talked about the aura being penetrative, needing consent. What that looks like for the projector is waiting to be recognized and invited. Recognized as a guide, invited to grab the monopole and penetrate, and to assist this person in whatever guidance they need. The generator strategy, manifesting generator strategy, is to wait to respond. They are always pulling life toward them like these great magnets. And when they live a life in response, as in waiting for something to grab them, and then they have a, ooh, yeah, I want to get involved in that. Or they have a, I don't want to get involved in that. And getting involved means I have energy for. When a generator has a response that is like, ooh, what they're saying is I can generate a life force for this. I can make energy to get involved in this. I can put my energy towards something, and I want to. It's going to feel satisfying for me. And when they have a, oof, what they're saying is, I don't have energy for that. I can't create energy for that. I don't want to get involved in that. No generating happens. And if they try and get involved in that, what they experience is called frustration. Now the manifestor strategy is wait to initiate. As in, what they're waiting for is something that comes from a very internal place that says they are ready to have an impact on something. They are ready to go out into the world and make something happen. It's a very intense process. And what we have for them is something we call cyclical energy, as in it takes a lot out of them. Now remember, they have motor to throat definition. Energy is coming from a motor, but it happens in a more cyclical process. There is a wave of power for initiation. And when it's done, they have a rest cycle. They need to replenish. They need to recover. Now I want to point out that no matter what aura type I talked about, wait was the word that I started with. Wait a lunar cycle, wait to respond, wait to be invited, wait to initiate. We all have to wait for something. So knowing what you're waiting for and knowing how and when to engage removes a lot of resistance in your life. You got to think about this literally like biking into the wind or biking with the wind behind you. I mean, sailing is a great way to do this. You know, think about these energetic forces that make it easier for you to move through things or make it significantly harder for you to move through things. Now, each aura type has a role to play out, and you're not going to live your role. And in living your role, let's think about it as like your job title. We all get a reward or compensation for doing our job well, for living our role well. Your compensation or your reward is your signature. If you are a reflector, your signature is surprise. You are delighted by life. You are surprised by what's happening. If you're a projector, your reward is success. You feel successful in your ability to guide the other. You feel recognized. If you are a generator type, then what you're going to get is satisfaction. Your reward is feeling like you have used your energy really, really well. You are content in yourself. If you're a manifestor, your reward for a role well done is peace. And ultimately what that feels like is nobody in your way. Nobody's stopping you. You are at peace within yourself and what you are manifesting out in the world. Now, we know how to engage, but there's an internal decision maker that helps us know if we should engage or not. Not everything coming to us is something that we should be getting involved in. We all have an internal authority. This is probably the most important thing about human design. This is the core of why you have access to this information, because you are ready to become your own authority. Let's touch on rebellion. You know, I talked about conditioning forces. Our parents were huge conditioning forces. Food is a huge conditioning force. Let's combine the two and think about your parents telling you how to eat. That's one of the first things that we want to rebel against as kids. What they tell us to learn, what they tell us to believe. Let's talk about what rules to follow. Government is a huge, huge authority figure that we are told we have to listen to. Our parents are authority figures we are told we have to listen to. Teachers are authority figures. Religious leaders are authority figures. Fucking celebrities at this point become authority figures. There are so many forces that will tell you what you're supposed to be, how you're supposed to act, what you should decide, what you should believe, what's right for you or not. Ultimately, that's what it is. External things telling you what's right for you or not. And the beauty of human design is something called differentiation. If you have landed at human design, you are on the pathway to figuring out how to become a differentiated person. Getting emotional. Okay. That's the core, that's the beauty. Human design is going to give you the power to be a differentiated person where you become your own authority figure. I cannot go over all of the authorities right now. If you've got a Bodygraph, it literally tells you what your authority is. We all have different types of authority. We all have a thing either in us or working with us. You know, like the Reflector is working with the moon. They don't have internal definition. But the rest of us who have internal definition, we either have an actual center or a process related to centers that is going to help us figure out the best times to say yes or no for things that we are going to allow to control us. The experience on the planet that happened with COVID is very, very fascinating to me in terms of bringing people to their own authority. Because there was so much mass confusion and there was so much information, and not all of the information made sense. So much of the information was conflicting. So many people are wondering, you know, what are the powers that be that are telling us what to do, and why are they telling us what to do? And government is going to try and tell people what to do for a very long time. Rulers have told people what to do for a very long time. And yet we all have something that says why we don't have to listen, why we don't have to follow, why we don't have to participate, why we don't have to agree. Here's my stance on a COVID vaccine. Use your authority. That's it. It's so simple. It's so simple that people have such a really hard time grasping it or believing that they can do that. Whether or not I'm going to put something into my body is because my authority is going to say no. Or in my case, my authority is not really going to say anything. I'm splenic authority. It's health driven. If something is not for me, I get a no, that is not healthy. Like, that's how I feel my authority in my body. You're all going to feel your authorities differently. But strategy and authority are ultimately the practical tools of this system to help you live your life as a differentiated, unique individual without resistance who is experiencing their signature because they're living out their role the way that they were designed to. Yeah. Now, unfortunately, Ra-Uru-Hu, who had the encounter with the voice and was brave enough to talk about that experience and bring us all of this information, he's not alive anymore. And since he has passed away, many people have learned about the system and shared aspects of the system honestly, with anybody who's willing to listen, with anybody who asks them. Like, we have our own ways that we bring the system out. But in the beginning of trying to learn what is human design, most of the information that I encountered was from people who didn't have a very in-depth or integrated understanding of it. It was really light. It was really fluffy. It was really surface. You know, I've seen people reduce it into like, human design is like your ability to live out what your soul came here to be. And that's a poetic way to put it into one sentence. But for someone like me, for myself, I needed so much more background in order to understand really what this is, how it happens, why it works. I had so many questions. And ultimately, I love learning that this whole system extends far beyond the human component of it. It speaks to our entire origin, our entire cosmic origin. It speaks to the future of where we're going. There are designs of plants. There are designs of mammals. There are designs of insects. There's the story of how the Biverse is created. Like, I wanted to know about neutrinos. I wanted to know how the gates correspond to amino acids. You know, there's an aspect or a subject in the school of the science of differentiation called the personal health system, and that is very much about the body, about the form. That's where you'll find that thing cognition I talked about earlier. And then there's another subject called rave psychology, and that's about helping the passenger, helping the personality understand what its job is and what its job isn't when it's here. There are so many places to explore way more depth to what this system is. I have barely touched on it today, and yet I have touched so much more than what a lot of the initial resources I encountered were able to share with me. I hope that I have just sent you on one hell of a journey of discovery.